Let's move to the big story we will be tracking today. After tracking it all of yesterday, after a 9-hour marathon meeting of the RBI board, amid a rift between the central bank and the government over several issues, the board discussed the Basel regulatory capital framework, a restructuring scheme for the stressed MSMEs, bank health under the Prompt Corrective Action Framework, and the economic capital framework of the Reserve Bank. Lata Venkatesh is here to detail all what took place in that meeting. Lata, good morning.
Well, I would say the government won 4-1, so to speak. It's quite clearly a government victory, but on the face of it, it may not look like that. RBI still gets to keep its capital, but it will be decided by a government RBI panel. Now, as until now, it was an RBI-appointed panel, like Mr. Malegaon was appointed by RBI itself, to decide how much capital RBI needs way back in 2011 or 12. So until now, it was Usha Thorat panel. Before that, Subramaniam panel. It was an RBI set-up panel. Now it's going to be an RBI government panel. So much will depend on who the members are. So for the moment, one would look at it as actually a victory for the government. The second one, restructuring of loans. Well, you could say it's a government demand and therefore the government had its way. But I don't think the RBI would have been very unhappy. They have in the past given SME packages and MSME forbearances. I think they still will control the details of that. They will not allow it to become a loan mela like some would fear. The details will still be worked out by RBI. So I wouldn't say that RBI lost on that. On that, the government correctly had its way. On PCA rules, the Reserve Bank has secured its postponement to December 14th by the by the Board of Financial Supervision. The Board of Financial Supervision has 2 board members. I think it must be Mr. Bharat Doshi, who's the only chartered accountant I can remember in the board, and probably now Revati Iyer, who's a former CAG. But it has got all the DGs also in that board. So my sense is nothing much has been lost. Probably the Reserve Bank has succeeded in pushing it to a later day. So I would say the Reserve Bank has had its way largely, but it could have to give away its initiative by December 14. But let's leave it at that. Maybe there it is 1-all, if you please. On the issue of capital, the Basel norms remain at 9. Now that is a genuine victory because the government was bearing down on RBI to say that it should be brought down to 8%, which is the international minimum capital norm set by Basel. RBI keeps it at 10, keeps it at 9. Now, that is a bit of RBI able to stand its ground. And the fact that, that 0.625% of additional capital that would kick in on April 2019 has been postponed to April 2020. My sense is even left to itself, RBI may have postponed it because banks are going through a difficult time. That's not a very big giveaway. But the point is the way in which the press release was worded, that the board has decided to keep the CRAR at 9%. This is not the bloody board's terrain at all. The board comprises, industrialists. They can't decide what shall be the capital of the banks who lend to them. So the wording was extremely unhappy. The board decides to keep the CRAR at 9%. Clearly looks like it's a concession that the board has given to the RBI. That's an unhappily chosen word. So net, yes, there have been no resignations. But it does look like the Reserve Bank has lost on several counts and on several counts managed to postpone. So at best, you can call it a damage control that it has secured. It is not the RBI that was as independent, say, 1 year ago or 2 years ago.
Okay. All right, Lata. Thanks very much for that. Well, we spoke to former finance ministers Yashwant Sinha and P. Chidambaram as well, and Vaij Malingam and other experts. Listen in.
Why suddenly the reserves of the Reserve Bank of India, the capital base of the Reserve Bank of India becomes such an important issue? Because the government is trying to delve into it, take a part of it away. Fortunately, it didn't happen today. The scheme which the Prime Minister announced a few days ago that we'll agree the loans will be sanctioned within 60 minutes was nothing more than a loan mela. Now, we should not impose a loan mela on our banks. They have every right to be prudential about it, and that is how it should be.
Happy that the board stopped with advising the RBI. That's how it should be. That's the board's function, to advise the RBI. Essentially a function of the RBI, and it remains within an RBI Board of Supervision. That's how it should be. There's no harm in the board discussing it, but I think the board correctly acknowledged this is a matter which should remain within the RBI and cannot become a matter of discussion at the board level or at the government level. So let the RBI look at the PCA norms, and if the RBI wishes to revise the PCA norms, it will revise the PCA norms. The board could have advised the RBI to consider whether some relaxation should be given in the CRAR and the last tranche of the CRAR. But there I think the board overstepped its limit, and I'm disappointed that the governor gave in on that.
The board has a separate function and the governor has a separate function. Both have the equivalent powers, and insofar as the board is concerned, they can review the function of the governor, they can review the policies which are formulated, they can discuss with the governor, and they can offer their views on the matter, but they cannot direct. I don't think any of these decisions have in any way affected the powers of the Reserve Bank governor. They are reiterating what is the correct position, that the board has the obligation to keep the governor informed about matters in which they have the expertise, to offer suggestions, to be a sounding board for policies, and to make recommendations which then the governor is free to accept or not accept, but to tell him that you perhaps would like to reconsider these matters. And therefore, there's been no change in the position.
I'm glad that the board meeting today has decided that if there is a technical issue, let a group of people who are knowledgeable look at the issue, look at past precedent, look at international experience, do a few scenario analysis in terms of how the situation obtains in India as of today, and then come up with a set of recommendations. So I'm delighted, and I'm very glad that the decision has been to set up a panel.
I would imagine that some liquidity measures would be taken and would be welcome because it would ease all the thing. As regards the issue of PCA, I would want to see what the RBI has said, because that again is something of a very, very critical issue which should not be decided in a knee-jerk fashion, but one should look at a long-term plan of how to kind of look at the PCA, review it, and I would imagine my view would be that one should strengthen prudential norms even as we are relaxing the PCA norms.
All right, so that was all that took place yesterday in that marathon meet. But with that, we slip into a short break. Come back, we talk about some politics. Chhattisgarh to go for its second and final phase of assembly elections. More on that when we return.